Very good.
Counterintuitive.
Counterintuitive leadership. That's right. I call this counterintuitive leadership because ultimately the success of an organization or the success of an individual rises and falls on that individual. Unfortunately, there are a lot of businesses, a lot of leaders that fail to reach the goals that they've set out for themselves or the level of success that they would want simply because they don't lead in a way that fosters sustainable success. A lot of times we will behave in a way toward our leaders or toward our workers in a way that is natural to us, that is really innate to our personality. And those aren't bad, and we'll see that as we move forward. But essentially what we understand is there are practices and behaviors that are far more sustainable, but they're not natural to who we are. So that's why I call them counterintuitive. They can be mastered, they can be learned. So when we talk about success, there are two things that we have to understand. There are two questions that really come to mind. Conventional wisdom would say, if you want to grow your organization, to grow your business to whatever height or whatever scale you have set out for yourself, then you would ask the question, how? In other words, here's who we are, here's where we want to be, how do we get there? That's conventional wisdom. Now, successful wisdom, the wisdom that really brings you to a place where you can be the best that you can possibly be, will not ask how, but will ask why. Now, in a minute, I'm going to help you understand where to apply the why. And so we start with how, conventional wisdom. How do we get to where we want to be? Or why? So let's understand Bob and Jill. Let's say Bob and Jill both own a company that makes widgets. They want to be the greatest widget maker in the nation. Now, Bob, owning his widget making company, has decided that he was going to say, okay, we want to be the greatest widget making company in the world. So how can we get there? Jill asked the same question. She wants to make sure that her business can be the best that it can possibly be, but she asked why. Now, before I explain the why, let me just tell you that research and studies have shown us that when we ask how, when we say, here's where we want to be, how do we get there? In other words, how do we align our organization? What kind of processes need to be in place? What kind of resources do we need to have? How can we reduce overhead in order to reach our goal? Studies show that that is really only about 10% of success. And of course, that didn't make Bob too happy. Jill, on the other hand, she asked the question, why? And when we ask the question why, studies will tell us that that gains 90% of increase or a growth for our organization. And obviously that made Jill happy. But when we're looking at the how and the why, we have to know, first of all, what is this question why? What are we asking? What is the why? Where do we apply the why? The why has to be defined counterintuitively. The why is not just a random question, but it is a counterintuitive why. Here's what I mean by that. We can't ask the question why, meaning why does our business exist? So if Bob and Jill are both widget makers and Bob says, okay, we want to be the greatest widget maker in the nation, how do we get there? Then they align their organization to that goal. And when the goal essentially becomes the God, then processes can be manipulated, integrity can be compromised, and people essentially become a means to an end. But if we ask the question why, we can't ask why does our business exist? Because if we ask the question why does our business exist, essentially we will get right back to the how almost immediately. And it would work like this. If Jill would have asked the question why, meaning why does our business exist? She would say our business exists to make widgets. How do we become the best widget maker out there? You see how that worked? Instantaneously reverting back to the how, which only gets us 10% success. We have to ask the question why, but we have to apply the why to the right place. And it's a counterintuitive why. And here's what it looks like. Why is it counterintuitive? Because it is a goal that puts people above personal success. And it works like this. Jill wants to be the greatest widget maker on the planet. So she doesn't ask, why do we exist? Well, it's to make widgets. She says, here's what we do. Here's where we want to go. These are the goals that we have out before us. But then she turns around from looking at the goal, resisting the temptation to allow the goal to become the God. And she turns back into her organization and she asks the question, why do I exist in this company? Not why does the company exist, or it is not why, how can we get to where we need to be? But she says, why do I exist in this company? What is my role? And if you can ask that question, what about me? What is my job? What pushes me forward? Then we begin to look at the organization and we say, okay, as a leader, my purpose for existing is to make sure that my people are the greatest versions of themselves that I can help them become, even if it means losing some to my competition. That's why this is a counterintuitive why, because it's not conventional. It is not something that is natural for people's thought process to say, I'm going to create such a powerful team that I might even lose some to another to my competition, or they might even go out and start my competition. So it's a counterintuitive why. Now, here's what happens and why this counterintuitive why is so important. Every organization that exists has three problems: people, process, and profit. Whatever challenge, whatever obstacle, whatever failure you have endured or encountered throughout the process of building your organization, every challenge has fallen under one of these three categories: people, process, or profit. However, this particular graphic is a little askew because it suggests that all three of these problems are equal. And of course, they are not. The Wall Street Journal published a research article not too long ago, just a few years ago, that they wanted to know why there were some organizations that started, enjoyed a measure of success, and then ended up failing and having to close. So they wanted to know why. What was the contributing factor to these organizations ultimately starting, growing, and then failing? And the research showed that 46% of those organizations failed because they did not invest into either the leadership skills of themselves or the leadership skills of their key people. 11% was a lack of experience of either themselves or some of their team members. And the final 43% could be divided up into everything, whatever else was left. Maybe poor location, maybe poor product, bad economic times. Whatever the case was, that 43% gets sliced and diced into all kinds of things, leaving really the largest culprit negatively impacting our organizations is a failure to invest into our personal leadership skills and invest into the team. In other words, the goal cannot become the God. We cannot be so consumed by reaching the goal that the whole organization gets aligned to meet that goal. If we invest into our team and we pour ourselves into our people, they become so enamored with the leader, they become so invested into the vision of the company that you will hit that goal just about every time. It works. It truly works. So when we talk about leadership within organizations, there are two ways in which people lead. Neither one of them are bad. So I'm not suggesting that this is a bad thing. The first one is a personality leader. This is the kind of leader who leads out of what is natural to his or herself. And the second is the counterintuitive leader. This is the leader who has understood that there are certain competencies that are not natural to our human nature and has disciplined his or herself to master these competencies. And in those occasions where he or she would have felt compelled to react or respond or behave in whatever is natural to the self, has ignored that and went ahead and practiced the counterintuitive leadership style. So, let me go quickly through these two personalities. We all know that we are either an introvert or an extrovert. And out of these two personality types are temperaments. There are two temperaments for each of these, and I'm going to go through them one by one real quickly. But from the temperament are behaviors that naturally occur in a leadership context. The first is an introverted phlegmatic. If you've done any personality studies, you've heard some of these words. And when I do an assessment for my clients, I give all the definitions of what these are and what the characteristics of an introverted phlegmatic and so on and so forth. But an introverted phlegmatic will have a leadership behavior of, first of all, being transactional, meaning this leader, when confronting problems or confronting problematic people, is more likely to try to rectify the problem or satisfy the problem by throwing money at it or incentivizing the problem. Interestingly enough, transactional leadership happens whether the person is an introvert or an extrovert, but an extrovert, when dealing with a problem, will deal with it differently. And we'll get to that in a minute. But an introverted phlegmatic is likely to be more transactional, but he or she could also be what is considered bureaucratic, meaning when they find a problem or a problematic person, the way they solve this problem is to lean heavily on company policy. What do the rules say? What have we been doing all along that takes care of such a problem? The problem with bureaucratic leadership is most organizations that I have come across and what I've read about, it's something that organizations kind of neglect, and that is keeping their company policy updated. And so strategic leadership used to be every 5 years. It is now every 2 years. And the reason for that is because the culture around us changes so rapidly that we cannot rely on a handbook that is grossly outdated by even 5 years. So an introverted phlegmatic will be either transactional or bureaucratic simply by nature. And of course, the other one is melancholy. This is the second temperament that comes out of the introvert. A melancholy leader will solve problems from a laissez-faire perspective. This is the most laid back kind of leader you would ever want to meet. They don't get riled up very easy. You don't see them lose their cool or lose their temper. So their response to problems is more laissez-faire. The word laissez-faire is French for literally let it be. And so oftentimes a person who finds himself in a leadership role who's an introverted melancholy, they are not going to deal with problems very often at all. In fact, they get anxiety thinking about problems. That's the introverted leader. Let's talk about the extroverted leader. The first temperament that flows from being an extrovert is what we call a cleric. And a cleric person, his or her leadership response will be what we call autocratic. Now, this is the most ineffective and most dangerous kind of leader there is if left to his or her own devices. Meaning, if this person only led as an introverted cleric autocrat, he or she's going to be iron-fisted, do as I say, not as I do. There's going to be threats of firing. They're going to lead by fear and not by inspiration. Let me just say real quickly, though, that there is place for these. I'm not saying that these are the work that you cannot ever lead like this. There is always a time in a leader's life, in a leader's career, where whoever he or she is naturally will be called upon to be that leader. When there's a stalemate when it comes to decision making and nobody can agree upon it, then they're all going to look to the autocratic cleric autocrat extrovert and say, make a decision, and he or she's going to have to go, okay, I got this, let's move forward. So that is the extroverted cleric. The sanguine would be a person who's more charismatic. These are the salespeople. These are the people who are out there just making deals, building relationships. People love the sanguine charismatic. There's not a person that they would ever meet that's a stranger to them. They could sell dirt in a desert. They're just that good. The problem with all of these is that while they can influence people to a degree, these kinds of leadership behaviors are not sustainable. They're not the kind of behavior that's going to cause leadership development within an organization that will be sustainable for those individuals. Eventually, if the introverted melancholy laissez-faire always deals with problems from that laissez-faire perspective, everybody is going to begin to wonder if he or she even cares about the problems of the organization. Or if the extreme opposite, if the extroverted cleric leader always leads from that iron-fisted, do as I say, leading out of fear, then they're going to essentially chase people away. So none of these leadership personalities and behaviors are the best way to move. So we have to understand the counterintuitive leadership, and that is that there are two more leadership styles. So you've got transactional, bureaucratic, laissez-faire, or autocratic, and charismatic. Those are 5 typical behaviors flowing from personality. These are 2 more leadership styles that are fairly common, but they are not natural to our human nature. Transformational leadership, servant leadership will always equal success. And the reason for that is because it requires the leader to give of his or herself for the good of an organization, even if it means, going back to what I just said, causing these followers of yours, your leaders, to leave your organization. We will never create successful organizations if we keep our people sort of at bay and keep them depending on our leadership. So the question is, why do I call these 2 counterintuitive? It is simple. I always love this illustration because it goes back to when we anticipated bringing life into this earth. I remember when my wife and I were pregnant with our children, especially our very first one, because we've never been through this before, right? This is brand new, and we are in great expectation of this new life coming into our world, blessing our lives, bringing happiness, bringing joy, bringing fulfillment, and that's what we got. We went from the great expectation to this, and while this is there, I don't know what's wrong with the little girl. I have no idea, but the reality is this is what human nature looks like. Human nature is selfish right out of the womb. We don't have to teach a child to lie. We don't have to teach children to throw a fit. And unfortunately, there are leaders who grow from adolescence, and if they're not disciplined, if they don't learn that self-discipline, if they don't learn to master things that are really good for them, then eventually we find leaders who grow into leadership positions and still possess these very selfish behaviors on their part. So this is why I call it counterintuitive. But let me just tell you what counterintuitive leadership looks like. I told you that it was servant leadership and transformational leadership, but let's talk about the competencies. The first one, and this isn't by accident, it's not by accident that empathy is the first competency that we put in there, because this is the beginning to all other, to unlocking all other doors beyond this. A servant leader, we're going to start with servant leadership. This is what we're doing, is building a house here. And if you're going to build a house, you have to start with a solid foundation. When you have the solid foundation, the sky is the limit on where you can take your organization. But it always starts with empathy. Empathy is not sympathy. Sympathy says, hey, look, I see the situation that you're in. I know that you're going through problems. I'm here for you. If there's anything I can do, you give me a call. I'm right there. That's sympathy. And we all need sympathy. Empathy is different. Empathy is the ability to feel and connect with a person's pain. And the reason why this is so powerful with leadership is because every one of us in leadership positions were once in the beginning places of employment. We worked hard. We dedicated ourselves. We got cheated. We got passed by. We got lied to. We got cussed at. We got swindled. And many of us have the bumps and bruises and if it were possible, a blood trail leading from out on the floor to the office that we now hold. And when a struggling worker can sense that, when they can hear your story of how you have dragged yourself to the level of success that you now possess, it inspires them. And the reason for that is because workers tend to have this philosophy, I guess, about leaders, that they're grand and they're lofty and they're larger than life. They have a hard time placing leaders into real life situations. But if they can hear our stories, there's nothing more powerful than a personal story, especially if it's just a story that paints the picture to a struggling worker that you were once struggling, but you've made it out of that. That inspires them. The second step to this process of helping our workers become better versions of themselves is what I call assuring leadership. Now, a synonym to assurance, I guess, could be inspiration. We like to inspire people, and this is where we get, once we've built that bridge of empathy and we know this person is struggling, now we need to inspire them out of this slump onto that mountaintop. But the mistake that we often make is that the inspiration that we provide sort of paints a picture of what tomorrow can look like. This is transactional leadership. We would say things like, I know you're going through a tough time right now, but tomorrow's another day. The sun will come up tomorrow. You're going to come out of this. Trust me. And we become an inspirational cheerleader. In those moments when a worker is struggling the most, painting pictures of a pipe dream that has not happened rarely works in a sustainable fashion. But what does work is what I call factual inspiration. You see, there's this saying that we have that says the windshield is bigger than the rearview mirror. And there's a reason for that. We should always be looking ahead and never looking behind. Not in this case. When a worker is struggling, what they need to be reminded that they still bring value to this organization. And that remembrance comes from the leader saying, listen, let's talk about all the things that you have accomplished. Let's talk about how great the organization is because of your presence here. Hey, let's look at your resume, which was the thing that caught our attention about you in the first place. The reason why this is important is because when a worker begins to fail or has failed, especially if they're in what we call a slump and they can't seem to come out of it, they begin to doubt two people. The first one is themselves. They doubt themselves. They've lost a step. They shouldn't be here anymore. I need to change jobs. The second person they begin to doubt is you, the leader. They're coming into work every single day wondering whether or not this is the day I get fired. But what they need is they need a leader that does believe in them, that believes that they still bring value to an organization. So those are the first two steps. Let's talk about the third step to servant leadership. I call it spiritual leadership. And the reason why I call it spiritual leadership, it's not about converting people to a particular religion. In fact, one of the things that I find about lots of religions, and I've studied lots of different religions, that there are certain characteristics about humanity that are common, woven, and threaded in and throughout all of these religions. And that is emotional intelligence, integrity, accountability, and responsibility. I call this spiritual leadership because this is the only competency out of the 7 that I'm going to talk about that the leader does for the leader. These other ones the leader does for his or her workers. This is the only one that a leader looks internally and says, where am I at on emotional intelligence? Meaning, what are my triggers? What sets me off? Do I have a short temper? Self-awareness is very important. Integrity, accountability, responsibility. I write about these in my book, and I won't go into detail on those other 3, but emotional intelligence I want to say something about. Here's what I tell leaders. This is a tall challenge. It's a very high order. I tell leaders this: you don't get to come to work and have a bad day. You don't get that privilege. You have chosen this position of leadership. You have taken on the responsibility to be a positive influence for the people who have decided to follow you. They've got their own problems. They come into work every single day, and sometimes they've got life issues that are bringing them down. They depend on a leader, a captain of that ship, to tell them, hey, our organization is good. We're going to make it. We're going through some troubles. I wouldn't want to encourage you to provide empty praise for people. I write about empty praise in my book too. It doesn't go anywhere. People know when things are bad, so we don't want to glaze over bad things and call them good. Let's call them for what they are. But at the same time, there has to be a sense of optimism. The leader doesn't get to come in and have a bad day. And that's a big, big order. But people are depending on you to be the kind of leader that brings the inspiration where they can say, hey, if he is optimistic, I'm going to be optimistic too. That's what we call servant leadership. This is the foundation upon which we can build our organization. We're going to talk about transformational leadership now, and that's in twofold. You transform your organization by first transforming your people, but you cannot do either if you don't have this first. If you don't have the servant leadership mastered, you cannot build your organization by transforming your people. You have to start here. In all of the research that I have done, when I measure people's competencies of transformational and servant leadership, here's what I find. People who score stronger in servant leadership and lower in transformational leadership have a much better time increasing their transformational leadership. On the other side of that same coin, people who score high in transformational leadership and low in servant leadership have a more difficult time continuing both. They have to relearn how they empower their people because they have not served them. They have not mastered the servant leadership. So, okay, let's talk about transformational leadership. The first competency that is necessary for transformational leadership is to be decisive. This is something that so many people struggle with, being decisive. Now, let me talk to you about this as a double-edged sword. The first thing that I would say about decisive leadership is we must understand our PDT, our personal data threshold. What does that mean? What is a PDT? Well, your personal data threshold is simply means that everything that you know now, every experience you've had, every shred of education, everything that you know now culminates to your personal data threshold. It's just what you know. Everything that you know is what you know, and you don't know anything more. Here's the problem with our PDT. Tomorrow, next week, next month, you may come across a decision that your PDT cannot inform. In other words, there's all kinds of knowledge outside of our PDT, and your organization, you as a leader, may encounter one of those challenges or one of those opportunities that your PDT cannot inform, which takes me to the second talking point of decisive, and it's what I call the Rush philosophy. The Rush philosophy is built on the band Rush, who wrote a brilliant lyric so many years ago in a song called Free Will. And the lyric goes like this: if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. It begs the question, what then did you decide? If you choose to not decide, and according to this philosophy, you've still made a choice, it begs the question, what did you decide? Well, some people would say, well, if my PDT cannot inform this decision, then I've averted disaster because I cannot make a decision without knowing what I should do. And I would say, I think you've avoided success. You would say, well, Dr. Mike, how do I avoid success if I don't know what the right decision is? It reminds me of a story that I read about, and forgive my lack of finer details because I've tried to locate the story in my books, but I can't find where it is. A CEO was appointed to his position at a struggling, dying organization. He stepped into the helm of this position, and working with his executive team, they began to make decisions that just seemed to have the Midas touch. Everything they touched turned to gold. The business started to take off. Bonuses were had. People were enjoying raises. The company was just taking off. One day after a meeting, one of the CEO's board members came up to him and he says, I have to ask you, what is it about you that causes you to be so successful? And his response was this: the secret is making right decisions. And his colleague looked at him and he said, I get that. I understand that the secret is making right decisions, but how do you know what the right decisions are? And he said this. He says, because I have spent years making the wrong ones. You see, what's fascinating about that story is more often than not, we want the lessons that we learn to come from our victories and successes, and that's not true. The greatest lessons that we have learned have come through adversity and failure. Now, when it comes to taking your PDT and applying that to decisions that your PDT cannot inform, it challenges us to say, will I be a mediocre leader who will lead from within my PDT, or will I step outside of my personal data threshold, take a risk from time to time, and learn something? If it doesn't work out, hey, let's not call that a failure. Let's call that experiment. We can say that didn't work. Now we know it doesn't work. And then the next time, and then the next time, and you start to build a very valuable personal data threshold so that one day, the decisions that your organization makes begins to make the right ones that causes your organization to be as successful as you want it to be. Decisive leadership, very powerful, very important. Creativity. I love talking about creativity because what I tell people is I cannot teach you how to be creative. And most people who take my assessment, some people will come back and go, gee, I thought I was a lot more creative than that. Well, it's not about whether or not you're creative. It's about whether or not you fan the flame of creativity into the lives and hearts of the people that you have employed. But here's what's fascinating about creativity. You remember the introvert and the extrovert that we just talked about? Well, guess which one of those has historically, studies find, is more riddled with a sense of creativity? It's the introvert. Introverts, because of their contemplative nature, are more often to be far more creative than their extroverted counterparts. But here's where it really gets fascinating. Guess who dominates leadership roles? Extroverts. There are more extroverts in leadership roles than there are introverts. And so how do we apply counterintuitive leadership to this particular competency? It's very simple. The extroverts dominate leadership roles, but the one fascinating thing about us extroverts is we like our ideas and not many other ideas. It's a very interesting thing about the extrovert. We love our ideas, and it's hard for us to accept other people as ideas. But the extroverted cleric, autocrat, or the extroverted sanguine charismatic who has disciplined his or herself to say, I know that I'm not very creative, but I have workers around me that are. Now I can counterintuitively, I can embrace their ideologies. I can bring them in and say, you tell me what we should do. That, my friends, is true counterintuitive leadership. That is a leader willing to step outside of his or herself and say, I want my people to know that they are helping to move this ship forward, and we are changing our society for the better, and they play a big role in it. Empowerment kind of goes along with all this. But one of the things that I would tell you about empowerment, especially from the extroverts, is the most extreme version of an extroverted leader is what we call an owner leader. These are leaders who are addicted to the followership of their people. They get uncomfortable when a rising star comes through their organization, and they begin to do things either subconsciously, subtly, or otherwise to keep that worker at bay, to keep that person to understand where their place is in the organization. Empowering leaders build legacies. They don't build empires. I had a conversation with a potential client a number of years ago, and he used the word empire to me. I write about this in my book. You see how I keep shamelessly plugging my book? So he and I were talking, and he says, Mike, I want you to help me build my empire. And we talked a little bit about that. And when I had the chance to speak, I said, can I challenge you with something? And he said, yeah. I said, can I challenge you to remove the word empire and put in the word legacy? And he wanted me to explain it, and so I did. I said, you're going to reach the greatest level of success that you're going to reach by empowering your people to use their own sense of creativity, to make decisions on their own, to give them the opportunity to help bring this organization to where you need it to be. When you do that, that is when you will reach success. But if you keep your people at bay and you build an empire suggests kingship. A king has subjects, and subjects work at the whim of the leader. There is a triangle diagram that shows the difference between leadership back in the Industrial Revolution. Whereas the leader was at the top of the triangle, the workers are at the bottom, and everybody works toward the whim of the leader. That triangle is turned over these days. The leader is now at the bottom, the workers are at the top, and the leader works to make those workers as successful as they want to be for the organization. That is the kind of sustainable success that organizations today are quickly realizing is the best way to reach those goals and the only way to keep your organization sustained for years to come. Finally, I want to tell you about something that's near and dear to my heart: visionary leadership. Let me just say that, first of all, visionary leadership is also a two-edged sword. One, an organization must have a vision statement for their organization. People need to know that they're a part of something that's moving forward. People need to know that they're a part of an organization that knows where it's going. And people need to know that they're working for a leader that knows how to take that organization there through empowering and fanning creativity and decisiveness. But here's the interesting thing about visionary leadership. It is the leader's job. It is incumbent upon the leader, not just to paint a picture of where the organization is going and how it's changing the world, but to paint that picture into the hearts of every one of your people to help them understand that they are part of a bigger purpose. It happened to me. 1995, I was operating the largest press in Northeast Ohio. We were making sleeper cabs for Freightliner trucks, both left and right panel and the center panel. They developed this process called in-mold coating, whereby the press would open up 3/4 of the way through the curing process and inject this rubberized coating. The press would then close, and then after the curing process was done, it would open back up, and this part that used to be a white fiberglass part was now this dull black rubberized coating. And what it did is essentially it replaced the process of priming for Freightliner, saved them millions of dollars a year. They no longer had to prime. They would receive the parts from us at Mount Holly, North Carolina, and they would take that part right to paint. But it also did one more thing. That rubberized coating made that paint glow. I mean, it was absolutely glorious. Well, one time, because I was one of the primary press operators, they came to me and said, listen, you know all about this because you work with the engineers. We want you to step out of production, go into HR, develop a training program for all 3 shifts, all 3 factories. I did it. I was excited about it, but I was also nervous at the same time. And I did all this training. And then, of course, at one point, they flew a small group of us down to Mount Holly, North Carolina, to see these parts that we had made. We get to this larger-than-life factory. I'm watching these semi-trucks being dragged through this massive assembly line, all the colors in the rainbow, and then some. But what I wanted to see was those black parts that I made. I wanted to know where the staging area was, where they received the parts from Northeast Ohio. We found it, looked into those parts, and I wanted to look inside. I don't know what it was, but I wanted to see my part number or my employee number on the inside of that part. So we found the parts and I looked, and there it was, 11339, my employee number. Something happened in that moment. Something changed in my heart. I used to go into work every day, 390 some degree press with these dies, fiberglass floating in the air, super hot in this factory. And I used to walk into work thinking there has to be more to life than this. Mundane, humdrum, repetitive, 98 stinking parts every day. In that moment, when I saw that number on those parts, it changed my thinking about my job. I saw it bigger now. I knew that when it came to you receiving a package at your home, or you going to the grocery store to buy groceries, or you buying picking up some medication, I was the very beginning stage of building the truck that brought those products to those stores so that your life could be better. I don't know if the rest of the people on that trip felt the same way, but it changed this 24-year-old at that time. It changed how I saw my job. It changed my perspective, and it brought me to a place where I knew I had become transformed. I had seen my job in the worst way possible, but now somebody planted vision in my heart. Now, to be fair, not every factory can afford to fly every employee to Mount Holly, North Carolina, but it's incumbent upon us, leaders, to find that creative way to plant that vision inside your workers' heart so that they too can realize that they are changing the world around us. Servant leadership, that's the foundation. Transformational leadership, the sky is the limit once we have that foundation. Before I go, I want to give you just a couple of statistics on business coaching. This is what I do. So this presentation is just the door. It's just the threshold into what I do. But I want to give you some statistics on why what I do is so vitally important. Business coaching has improved working relationships with direct reports. This was reported by 77% of executives who use and hired a business coach. It improved working relationships with immediate supervisors, as reported by 71% of executives who retained a business coach. And it improved the overall teamwork of the organization, as reported by 67% of executives who hired a business coach. It also, a report also says that an internal report of the Personal Management Association showed that when training is combined with coaching, see, what I just did was training. My goal is the next step for the people that you would refer me to is to take it to that, what I call IPD, that individualized performance development. But what showed that when training is combined with coaching, individuals increase their productivity by an average of 86% compared to 22% with only training alone. This is why the whole one-size-fits-all training where we would go to conferences and seminars simply doesn't work. It's a lot of money that only lasts for about 6 months at best. One more statistic. In a study conducted by Metrics Global, companies received an average return of $7.90 for every $1 invested into executive coaching. It just works, but it has to be on an individual level. No one size fits all. Well, the way I do it is with a process called SCAN. SCAN stands for skills analysis, and it measures those 7 competencies of where a person is strong and weak, and it also shows their personality traits, but it also shows where those personality traits interfere with those competencies. So we can say, okay, we need to work on your autocratic nature because the autocratic nature might be interfering with your ability to empower your people. Those are the kinds of things that my SCAN assessment does. It's essentially a research process called triangulation in qualitative research. I'm essentially measuring a person's philosophy, their personality, and their practice, which gives me the one unique pathway per individual to help them become better versions of themselves, both professionally as well as personally. That's me, Execuspect Leadership Development, where I am developing successful executives by improving leadership perspectives, professional and personal success through counterintuitive leadership. That's what this is all about. All right. Any questions? I'm gonna stop the share so I can see you all a little bit bigger.
Wow, Mike, that was amazing. I learned so much from that I can apply to my life. And I want to share right off the bat. I have like 3 businesses I want to share this video with.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, well, it's like, you're right. You know, in fact, my son who's in the Air Force is going through leadership management up there. And I said, so what would you say is the biggest thing you're learning in the military? And he said, well, they're really working to move from an authoritative leadership style to a servant leadership style.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
I was like, wowza. You know, and I asked him for some details, and, he shared a few things with me, but what you shared just now, I'm going to send this video to him if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. I'm encouraging everybody to share it, share it far and wide.
One of the things that he can do watching it is give a review of it, so that you could have reviews of this video that we could share with, that would make, other people would want to do it. And also, while I was on it, I texted Nicole and I said, you've got to get on Mike's thing here. This is really good. And she's like, oh crap, I forgot to put that on my calendar. So
that's okay. That's all right.
Very, very specific. And, I do want to talk to you. My boys have this business. I think I mentioned to you, Cocoa Bright. It's a toothpaste business. And
very cool.
I want to get with you about seeing what we can do, because I think that's our big thing. We need to not be in the how, and we've been in the how mode for a long time. We need to be in the why mode. We need to know what each other can do. We need to break this down. So I'd like to get together with you and see, find out how much you charge for being able to work with a fledgling company that's.
Sure.
And I also had a meeting yesterday with a gal. She owns 2 salons, and she's starting a boutique. And please come out. I'm sorry, I'm in my house moving. She's starting a boutique. In fact, she may be coming to our B&I meeting tomorrow. And I said, so what's your big, hairy, audacious goal? And she said, in 5 years, I want to own a warehouse and have a company that, ships and delivers all over the United States. So she's got a very big vision. And to start off her business with your kind of input, your kind of training for her, hiring people, working through that would be amazing for her. So
I would love to.
I'm hoping she'll come tomorrow, and if she does, you'll recognize it's the gal that's promoting her. Opening day for her boutique is like in 3 weeks, I think. So anyway, this was excellent. Thank you very much. I learned a lot, and I'm excited about the future.
Thank you, Darcy. Thank you for that. You're too kind.
You earned it. You earned it.
No, thanks. All right.
Who else we got on here still?
So Jacob is here. He said he's got a lot of background noise, so he's got his microphone off. I think Wilbert's still here, huh, buddy?
I'm here. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Man, I saw so many practical applications that you mentioned from my old work days in engineering that apply. Because you have a vast amount of personality. My question is, have you ever experienced where the introvert and extrovert have some shared tendencies? That you come up with a quote unquote third entity?
I don't know so much about a third entity, but I'm sure you're familiar with Myers-Briggs, the personality type indicator. Have you heard about that?
I heard a long time.
Yeah, Myers-Briggs, they are a mother-daughter team. Briggs is the daughter. She went and got married. But both of them developed this type indicator, and they have both stated that it is highly uncommon for a person to be purely one or the other, that it is either introvert or extrovert. And that they went as far as to say that if you ever found someone who is purely one and none of the other, there's probably some very disturbing things going on in their psyche that they probably need to get counseling. So what I find generally in my research when I administer this assessment is that people will have strengths in all 5 of those personality behaviors. They'll have a little bit of one, but predominantly there's going to be one that stands out. On those few occasions, there will be 1, 2 of them that are equal. But what I'm finding, and the longer that I do this research, I find that even though bureaucratic leadership is introverted and autocratic leadership is extroverted, they go hand in hand. An autocratic leader loves rules, but he loves people to abide by the rules while he or she himself doesn't necessarily apply. So yeah, I will find people who will have behaviors in both of those leadership styles. And I tell them, you're perfectly normal. In fact, you're psychologically healthy. But at the same time, I want to help them reduce those behaviors and become more of the counterintuitive.
And I already got it set to cut higher.
So we help them become more counterintuitive than leaning on their personality behaviors.
One of the things you commented on, I often, I had an employee that I always encourage her to make a decision, because that's the only way that you learn. You learn more. You become a stronger person to the team. Yeah. That's why you practice. And I've been a part of some organization where they say practice make perfect. They say no, perfect practice make perfect.
Yeah. I like the saying that says progress over perfection.
Yes. Because if you fail to make a move because you don't want to fail, then I believe you'll fail. You become that to me is a total failure, because you're right that you haven't made no progress, and after a while you find yourself regressing.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was in Little League Baseball, my coach always told me, don't go out looking at the third strike. You swing at that.
Oh yeah.
Go out trying. So
yeah.
Very good. I heard Robin on there. Robin, do you have any questions?
No, I think you did an amazing job, and I look forward to talking to my business partner about how we can use you with our leadership team.
Very good. Yep, we'll sit down and have that conversation.
Yeah, I'm going to meet with her on Friday.
Okay, very good. Well, is there anything else? I don't want to cut anybody off.
Hey, Mike, this is Jake. I'm sorry.
Hey, Jake.
Sorry if there's, again, that background noise, but great presentation. It's very cool to see, all the, when you had the breakdown between the introverts and the extroverts. It's very cool to be able to kind of pick your leadership skills, because, we all have our own opinion of how we lead, and you can kind of look at those charts that you had out there and like, maybe I'm more like, introvert, laissez-faire, more extrovert, and go like that route. And it's just cool to see. And like, I didn't realize how many different leadership styles there were. Like, I always thought I was more of an extrovert, where, look at the introvert and it's like, oh, maybe I fit that one a little more. So I don't know if it was like what Wilbert's question was, if you can get both of them, like each introvert and extrovert. That's what I was kind of confused by. Or if, you would just set one, but I guess that would be my question. You can be a little bit of each, or. Yeah. And I don't know if you heard me telling Wilbert, but Myers-Briggs, who do the personality type indicator, they have, in their research, they have said that it's psychologically unhealthy to be purely one and none of the other. In fact, it's perfectly normal.
And it's just interesting for me because every time I administer my scan assessment, which measures the strengths and weaknesses of those competencies and shows the dominant behaviors of those personality types, I'll see, and it's a blue bar graph, I'll see all 5 of those. Generally speaking, all 5 of those personality behaviors have some behavior. On occasion, there'll be one that has, like I'm working with a guy right now. He is such an introvert, and he has absolutely 0 autocratic behaviors in his style whatsoever, which is fine. But he does have a good mix of everything else. And I think that is perfectly natural from our human nature, because unless you are a psychotic, you recognize that there are some people who need you to behave in a certain way. I just think that that's part of our natural human nature, unless you're, again, like Myers-Briggs would say, if you're purely an extrovert, then chances are if you're never, ever, ever behaving as an introvert, which would mean you know when to back off. Or if you're a purely introvert, there are times, and my wife is like that. My wife is a strong introvert, but there are times when she has known that she's had to approach somebody or approach a group of people and say something that was on her mind. It's not who she is, but she realizes that there are occasions that calls her to step out of that comfort zone and do it. So it's perfectly natural to have some of all 5 of those personality behaviors. And while, again, I'll say this, while they're good, while they're not bad, they're just not sustainable. They don't bring your team to a sustainable effectiveness long-term.
Awesome. Thank you. I do recommend, if anybody hasn't had a one-to-one with Mike, he brought in his scan pamphlet for me to check out, and there's a lot of information. It's very cool. So definitely recommend anybody in here to
thank you.
Definitely set up a one-to-one and check that out. Great job, Mike.
Thank you, Jake. I appreciate that. Well, I think everybody who is on has spoken. And so that being said, I'm just going to bid everybody a good day, and we'll see everybody tomorrow morning at our BNI meeting, and hopefully everybody tomorrow night at John's house for our hoorah. So have a good day, everybody, and we'll see you in the morning.